You've been given some very bad advice on how to utilize Tonex Pedal that's making your life a lot more difficult. Stick with me today. We're going to sort this out and fix it so we can get you up and running using Tonex Pedal in the most efficient manner. So the advice that so many people give when setting up Tonex Pedal that is so incorrect is that we constantly need to be going here into global settings, into our input trim, and adjusting this up and down depending on the guitar that we have plugged into it. This is a global setting. We should be setting this one time and leaving it alone. That's why we have to go through so many clicks and menu dive to actually get to it, because it's not meant to be constantly played with. One thing folks do not think of Tonex Pedal as is that this is partly just an audio interface. Now, if we were to use this as an audio interface and think of it just as an audio interface, the input trim setting would be exactly the same as our instrument level input on our audio interface. Now, to make Tonex Pedal match up to some common audio interfaces on the market, let's say we were using a Universal Audio Apollo Twin and having the gain on the instrument level set at minimum, that would actually be approximately equivalent to setting the global input trim on Tonex Pedal to -4. Let's say we were using Line 6 Helix as an audio interface to feed into Tonex. That would be approximately equivalent to setting Tonex input trim to -3.5 or -3. And many other popular audio interfaces are going to be similar settings, maybe -5, -4, -3, when plugging into the guitar instrument inputs set to their minimum level. There's good reason for this. This leaves us quite a bit of headroom so that we're not going to be driving anything close to that 0 dBFS level when we are recording in a DAW. If we set this too high, or to the default setting of +8.5, it actually renders a very useful feature of Tonex as a USB audio interface in dual mode completely useless. Let me illustrate that. All right, so I want to show you what the real issue is here now with running your global input trim at that default 8.5 setting, or even settings that some people use that are higher than that. So basically here I am now in Cubase, and what I've done is I've set up Tonex Pedal as an audio interface, and I'm going to show you what the problem is with utilizing it at its global default input trim setting of +8.5. Again, this is an audio interface, right? It is at this point, and we can think of it as an audio interface all the time. So what we're actually doing is we're taking this audio interface, adding 8.5 dB of level to that instrument input. I'm set, as I mentioned, in interface mode, but I'm also setting USB dual output. And this is a feature a lot of folks don't know they have. If you're utilizing Tonex Pedal as an audio interface, there's a very cool feature where we can set up to capture the tone model that we're processing. So that would be this. Now you can see I'm capturing that up here on track 1. I have this other track muted right now, and I'm going to unmute it. This is what you're hearing there. Now, here's the problem. When I hit hard, you'll see down here on this DI track, because that's what dual mode is doing. It's sending out the tone model on one output and the guitar DI. So if we want to capture that for reamping purposes later, it's very useful. I use this all the time in the studio where I'm capturing my tone, but I grab that DI in case I want to change the tone or tweak it later. I can reamp it again. Problem is, if we capture this guitar DI at the +8.5 global input trim setting, watch what happens. I'm playing my Gibson Les Paul with fairly low output burst bucker pickups. Now, if I'm hitting even a little bit aggressive here, this clips and basically is going to render this guitar DI useless, as you can see down here. Now, if I grab the guitar that had even hotter output pickups, now I'm going to have to go in and adjust that even further. But even with a lower output level guitar, I might be able to get away with a Strat here and it would work. But it makes so much more sense for me to just go into global settings here to my trim in, set it like I usually set it, down around -3. That would be like using the Line 6 Helix as an audio interface. Or let's even do this. Let's set it at -4, which would be more in line with using something like the UAD Apollo Twin interface, set at the lowest setting on the guitar interface. Now I can get rid of this little clip indicator. Watch what happens. Now, what I'm going to want to do is come back in as I just bring that gain level up. So I used the gain control to compensate for the fact that I moved that global input trim down. And now I have the exact same sound as before, but I never have to go in and use that global input trim. I'm going to be able to capture a beautiful guitar DI in dual mode, capture my tone model, utilize my gain control, as we're about to go talk about in depth right now. So now we see we really shouldn't ever be setting this global input trim that high. I leave mine set at -3, and that turns the Tonex pedal as an audio interface basically into the same range as plugging into a Line 6 Helix. You could also run it at -4, and if you have a universal audio Apollo twin interface at -4, that would be very, very close to running your instrument input at minimum gain, which is leaving us a nice amount of headroom for the vast majority of guitars out there. So then the question arises, well, what do I do if Tonex tone models don't sound good with that low a global input trim? Well, we do not need to worry about that because we've always had a way to fix this, and not only fix it, but save the setting per preset. I've had so many people mention to me that, oh, I wish we had a per preset savable global input trim. We always have, and it is simply just the gain knob that we have in Tonex software, on Tonex One, or on Tonex Pedal, and it's always been there, and we can save it. Now, you might say, yeah, but the gain knob just simply has numbers, 5, 5.5, 6, all the way up to 10, and all the way down to 0. That doesn't correspond to the dB settings that we have in the global input trim setting, and I think that's where the confusion lies. So I have taken the time to put together a PDF. There is a link below to it. You can grab this for free from my website, and this is going to show us the effect in dB boost and cut, moving our gain knob up and down in 0.5 increments so that we can better align our gain knob and think of it more like adjusting our input trim. Using this, you will never have to go back into your global input trim. I would suggest setting it somewhere around -4 to 0, leaving that alone, and then you're going to be able to use your gain knob. So let's look at what the settings are when we utilize the gain knob. So you can see here I've done some careful measurements. I'm not going to go into how I did this, but I am going to give you audio examples in a second that proves that these are accurate. So basically what's happening here is if we start off with the gain knob at 5, its default setting, and think of this as sort of flat, 0 dB, no gain added or subtracted. If we move up to 5.5 on the gain knob, that is equivalent to adding in approximately 1.5 dB on the global input trim. Now, the reason I say approximately, I've rounded these, but this is going to be plus minus 0.2 dB. These figures are never going to be more than 0.2 dB off, and oftentimes they're right on the money, or 0.1 dB off, and that's not going to be something that's going to be audible, as you'll hear in the audio examples I'm going to play you very, very shortly. So if we move the gain knob to 6, we've added 3 dB. If we move the gain knob to 6.5, we've boosted 4.5 dB, again, from the position of the gain knob being at 5. Moving it up to 7 is going to be adding 6 dB from our original position. 8 is going to be equal to 8 dB. That's a nice way to remember that. 8.5 on the gain knob is going to be 9 dB of boost. 9 on the gain knob is going to be 10 dB of boost. 9.5 is going to be 11 dB of boost. And we max out with the ability to boost by 12 dB. Now, I know a lot of people will say, yeah, the global input trim can boost up to 15. Well, that is true, and we can get that extra 3 dB. I've never had to go up that high, and I would tend to think it's probably not going to be that useful. But again, depending on where we set our global input trim, we could just adjust in there one time if we need it to be higher and leave it higher all the time. Now, going the other way, starting back at our gain knob at 5, if we move down to the gain knob of being at 4.5, we are subtracting 2 dB. If we move down to 4, we're subtracting 4 dB from the original position. Moving down to 3.5, we're subtracting 6 dB. Down to the gain knob at 3, we're subtracting 9 dB. At 2.5, we're subtracting 12 dB. And at this gain knob setting of 2, we're subtracting 16 dB. Now, we don't really need to go much lower than that because that's even lower than our global input trim can go. The global input trim has basically -15 to a +15 setting. So basically here you can see we can have a swing from the gain knob at 2 all the way up to the gain knob at 10. We have a swing of about 28 dB that we can boost or cut. So how does this all sound, and is it true and accurate? What I'm going to play for you now is going to be a reamped set of sound samples that were done through Tonex Pedal. So what you're going to hear first and foremost is you're going to see Tonex Pedal with its input trim at a certain level and its gain knob at 5. And then we're going to switch that around and put the input trim back to 0 and then the gain knob up to where it equals the previous sound that we just heard. So you can hear that they are exactly the same. So for instance, we will start off, let's say with the global input trim boosted 3 dB or set to plus 3 dB, which is going to be equivalent, as we see from our chart, to the gain knob being on 6. So we'll listen to those pair side by side to hear that they sound exactly the same. Then we'll move the gain knob up to 7 and the input trim up to plus 6 dB and compare those. Then we'll move the gain knob up to 8 and boost the global input trim by 8 and so on and so forth. And we'll do that in both directions. So you can hear a lot of the various settings of the gain knob against the input trim counterpart that they match up with. And you will quickly see that we have no need to ever dive into our global input trim once we have it set in a way that's going to allow us to use all the features of Tonex Pedal to their full ability, including that dual setting I showed you when utilizing Tonex Pedal as an audio interface. So here are the sound samples. Now coming back over to Tonex Pedal here, I'm going to show you utilizing the beautiful new upcoming, available for pre-order right now, white Tonex Anniversary Pedal. And this is one of the tone models on here that ships with the pedal. And this is based off my incredible Marshall Silver Jubilee 2555X. Here's a tone. It's an overdriven tone. Now, here are the settings you were hearing with that. You are going to hear that with the global input trim set to plus 8.5, way higher than I would ever set it. But what I've done to counteract that, since I make my tone models to sound exactly as I capture them when Tonex Pedal is set to -3, I just simply have to come to the gain knob and move that down to 2.6, and it's going to sound exactly as I captured it, or it's going to sound the same as having the gain knob at 5 with the global input trim set to -3, and I'll show you that in a second. So here's the tone. Now, obviously, if I move the gain up to 5, I'm going to hit the front of the tone model with more input level, and it's going to saturate more. Now, there's nothing wrong with the way that sounds, but it sounds more saturated than the way I captured it and the way the amp was set up. There's nothing wrong with that. If you like it, though, it's perfectly fine and acceptable. But what if I set this back to the 2.6? This is how it sounded when I captured it. Now, what if I move this back up to 5, come into our global input trim and move that down to the -3 setting that I like. We have the exact same sound as if I had this set at 2.6 and the global input trim set to plus 8.5. So this idea that we need to be menu diving into Tonex Pedal and constantly adjusting global input trim, I think is just asinine. There's far too many people suggesting that. It is not the best way to work, as I hope I illustrated today. And there's just such an easier way to deal with all of this as I showed today. All right, so here we are over in Cubase now with 2 instances of Tonex software open. And I can illustrate the same thing in a number of ways. And I just want to do it so many different ways because so many people seem to argue and not want to believe that this is true. So what I've done is I have a little guitar DI here. One's muted, one's solo, but they're identical. I just duplicated the track. And I'm actually playing this through the same tone model as the previous examples, which is actually an IK tone model. I didn't want to use one of mine. I didn't want anybody to say, oh, it's because of the way you use your tone models or make your tone models or whatever. There's always a million reasons everybody wants to argue about this. And it confuses matters and doesn't really help anybody. So I'm using this IK included tone model called Seatbelt Blues. It sounds quite nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate the gain knob on the top instance of Tonex, and I'm going to manipulate the input level here, which is going to be the same as the global input trim on the pedal. So we'll just sort of take a listen to what this is. So you'll hear now that with the input at 0 and the gain at 5, we have an identical sound as I flip back and forth. I'll solo this and that'll let you hear these going back and forth. As we would expect, they sound identical. Why wouldn't they? They're exactly the same thing. Now, obviously, if I come in over here and crank the gain up to 10, now we go back and forth. Massive difference. This is what global input trim will do, is if we drive the input of one harder, it's going to saturate more. Well, we know that that's equivalent to a 12 dB boost by the conversation we've already had. So I can come down here, raise this by precisely 12. Now when we go back and forth, there should be no difference. And you can hear that they're identical sounding. Now, what if we come here and do smaller amounts? Let's maybe set this to 7, and that would equate to about a setting of 7.5 on our gain knob. Let's hear how these compare now. Here again, they sound identical. What about the other way around? Let's move this down now to, say, gain knob at 3, which will correspond with about a setting of approximately minus 9 dB over here on our input control. Okay, let's take a listen to those. Let's go even more extreme. Let's come down to a setting of minus 15 all the way. And that's going to be approximately 2.1 here. 2 is actually 16, but let's go 2.1. And you can hear pretty clearly that these all sound the same. Again, global input trim, or our input control, is doing nothing different than what the gain knob is doing. And this is so important because it can make our life so much easier. We can save this as a preset. Let's say I was utilizing this particular tone model and I said, you know what? I want to have a 6 dB boost. So I know that that equates to the gain control on 7, because let's say I'm using a low output strat and I just want that little extra kick. I simply come up here, I say strat, copy, name it whatever you want, hit save, and now I know that every time I come back to that particular preset, I'm going to have that gain knob set to 7, and we're all set. No need to menu dive and go into your global input trim. Stop listening to people telling you to go into input trim and change it for every guitar. It's not needed. All right, there you have it. What did you guys think? I hope that that kind of sets the record straight on this. There's far too much information out there telling people to dive into those global settings every time they change guitars, turn the global input trim level up and down. It's just not meant to be done like that. A global setting should be just set, left alone. If there was no other way to control this, I could understand having to do that. It would be a pain, but we would have to do it. But so many people have asked me, I wish I had a per preset savable input trim, and we do. We always have. And now we know that for certain. It is simply the gain knob. Go in, set your global input trim to a lowish setting so that we have enough headroom for all of our guitars, especially utilizing something like the dual audio interface setting where we can capture our dry guitar, so we won't be ruining that feature by driving it too hard and making that DI'd guitar unusable because it'll be clipping. Instead, we can set that at a reasonable level, and then we can just simply use our gain knob to adjust wherever we need that input level to be that's hitting the front of the tone model. Again, at the link below, I have that free PDF, which gives you the corresponding values for how much boost and cut is being applied by the gain knob. I hope that that's useful, and you can go grab that at my website for free. And just have that handy so you can know exactly when you move that gain knob, how much you're moving it by. After a while, you'll know instinctively how to use it and where to go without having to reference the chart. I hope you enjoy the music on the way out. I'm going to leave you with the demo video of some of the tones you heard today in the video. There are links in the description below to all the tones you heard today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope that that was a helpful video. Please like the video, share it with anybody you think would get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back very soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Ciao for now.